What if I told you that one of the most powerful militaries in the world was brought to its knees by farmers with rifles? That a war fought in the name of freedom tore a nation apart, both in Southeast Asia and back home in America? Now here's the mystery. How did a small country like Vietnam hold off not one, but two superpowers in just a few decades? And how did a conflict that started with whispers in the jungle end in flames on live television? By the end of this video, you'll understand the real story behind one of the most controversial and misunderstood wars in modern history, and why its echoes still shape our world today. The Vietnam War wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a collision of ideologies, cultures, and generations. On one side, the United States, determined to stop the spread of communism during the Cold War. On the other, North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, fighting for reunification, independence, and revolution. But this war wasn't just fought in jungles and rice paddies. It played out on American television screens. It shook the confidence of a nation, and it asked uncomfortable questions about power, morality, and truth. So let's rewind the clock. How did it begin? What went wrong? And why did it leave such a deep scar? To really understand the Vietnam War, we have to go back, way back, to the end of World War II. Vietnam had been under French colonial rule for decades. But in 1945, as the Japanese occupation ended, a Vietnamese revolutionary named Ho Chi Minh declared independence, quoting the American Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. He believed the world, especially the US, would support Vietnam's freedom. But instead of recognition, Vietnam was pulled into a brutal struggle with France. This led to the First Indochina War, 1946 to 1954. Now here's the kicker. It wasn't the Americans fighting yet, it was the French, with US money quietly backing them to the tune of billions. The result? In 1954, after a decisive Vietnamese victory at Dien Bien Phu, France surrendered. Vietnam was temporarily divided, the communist North led by Ho Chi Minh and the South backed by the US. Did this division plant the seeds of peace, or was it just the calm before the storm? The US was deep in the Cold War, obsessed with the domino theory, the idea that if one country fell to communism, its neighbors would follow. South Vietnam, under the leadership of President Ngo Dinh Diem, became America's next Cold War project. But Diem's regime was, well, let's say, unpopular. Corruption, religious persecution, and repression turned many Vietnamese against him. Meanwhile, the North supported a guerrilla movement in the South, the Viet Cong, to destabilize the South Vietnamese government. By 1964, the US was already heavily involved with military advisors and covert operations. Then came the Gulf of Tonkin incident, a controversial naval event that led Congress to give President Lyndon B. Johnson the power to escalate the war. Just like that, America was all in. By 1965, American boots hit the ground, and not just a few. Eventually, over 500,000 troops were sent. But this wasn't your typical war. There were no front lines. The enemy often blended with civilians. Dense jungles, booby traps, and ambushes made every day unpredictable. The US relied on air power, massive bombing campaigns like Operation Rolling Thunder, and chemicals like Agent Orange, devastating both the land and the people. And yet, the Viet Cong kept coming. Their strategy? Hit and run, blend in, wear them down. It was like trying to kill smoke with a hammer. Back home, things were shifting. Americans watched nightly news broadcasts showing burned villages, body bags, and confused soldiers. One question lingered in living rooms across the country. What are we even fighting for? As the war dragged on, protests erupted across the US college campuses, became battlegrounds. The civil rights movement, anti-war activists, and disillusioned veterans all questioned the war's morality. Then came 1968, the Tet Offensive. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched surprise attacks across South Vietnam, even briefly occupying the US Embassy in Saigon. Militarily, the US pushed them back. But psychologically, the damage was done. If the enemy could strike that hard after all the progress we were told about, were we really winning? This was the year Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated. The nation was in turmoil. Trust in government began to crumble. Can you imagine living in a time where every news story made you question reality? By the early 1970s, the US began withdrawing troops under a policy called Vietnamization, training South Vietnamese forces to take over. But behind the scenes, the war expanded. US bombings hit neighboring Cambodia and Laos, sparking even more chaos. In 1973, a peace deal was signed. US troops left. And in 1975, Saigon fell. North Vietnamese tanks rolled in. The war was over. Vietnam was unified under communist rule. The last images? US helicopters airlifting people off rooftops. South Vietnamese allies scrambling to escape. A war that started with ideology ended in evacuation. The Vietnam War cost over 58,000 American lives and millions of Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Laotian lives. It changed how the world saw the US. It changed how Americans saw their own government. And it left us with questions we still wrestle with today. Can military power solve ideological conflicts? What does victory even mean in a war like this? And how do we heal after national trauma? Do you think the Vietnam War could have been avoided, or was it always inevitable? If this story made you think or feel something, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Because history isn't just about dates and battles, it's about choices, consequences, and the stories that connect us all. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.